The house was a mid-century ranch in the sprawling suburbs of upstate New York, the kind of place bought for its good bones and quiet neighborhood. For Elias, a man whose life as a forensic accountant was governed by the rigid architecture of spreadsheets and predictable outcomes, the silence was the selling point. He had lived alone for 6 months. He had developed a routine. He drank exactly 2 fingers of bourbon at 9 p.m., brushed his teeth at 10:15 p.m., and was in bed by 10:30 p.m. But the insomnia didn't care about his schedule. It was a humid Tuesday in July when Elias found himself staring at the ceiling fan, the blades spinning lazily like the limbs of a tired swimmer. The digital glow of the alarm clock on his nightstand read 3:16 a.m. Down the hall in the living room stood the only impulsive purchase Elias had ever made, a massive mahogany grandfather clock. It was an antique, late 19th century American manufacture. It didn't just tell time, it dictated it. Its tick-tock was heavy, resonant, a heartbeat of brass and wood that permeated every wall of the single-story house. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was a comforting sound. It was the sound of order. Elias closed his eyes, breathing in time with the pendulum, hoping the rhythm would drag him back into sleep. Then the rhythm broke. It wasn't a crash. It was an absence. The heavy, metallic thrum of the pendulum swinging to the left occurred, but the return swing, the talk, never happened. Elias opened his eyes. The silence should have been absolute. The house should have plunged into that heavy, cotton wool stillness that follows a sudden noise reduction. But it didn't. Click, 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 click. Elias frowned, pushing himself up on his elbows. The sound was wrong. The grandfather clock possessed a slow, mournful cadence, 1 beat every second. 1, 2, 3. This new sound was faster, frantic. It was the tempo of a nervous finger tapping on a desk or a beetle skittering across dry leaves. He looked at the bedside table. 3:17 a.m. Plumbing, he whispered to the empty room. Just the pipes cooling down. He threw the duvet off. The air in the house was stagnant, heavy with the smell of old carpet and dust. He walked barefoot into the hallway, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He needed to reset the pendulum. That was all. The weights must have caught or the chain had snagged. A simple mechanical failure. The hallway was bathed in the milky blue light of the street lamps filtering through the transom window. At the end of the hall, the grandfather clock stood like a coffin on end. Elias approached it. The brass pendulum, usually a blur of motion, hung perfectly vertical, dead center. It was frozen. He placed a hand on the glass door of the clock face. The vibration that usually hummed through the wood was gone. The machine was dead. Click, 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 click. Elias froze. The sound wasn't coming from the clock. He held his breath, turning his head slowly, trying to triangulate the noise. It was dry, sharp, rhythmic, but not mechanical. It sounded wet yet hard, like a tongue clicking against the roof of a dry mouth, over and over again, with metronomic precision. It was coming from the kitchen. Elias felt a prickle of cold sweat manifest on his lower back. Logic, his old friend, tried to intervene. A mouse, a rat with a trapped leg, the refrigerator compressor failing. He walked toward the kitchen, passing the dead clock. The clicking grew louder. It wasn't echoing, it was distinct. It was coming from the center of the room. He reached the archway of the kitchen and slapped the wall switch. The fluorescent tubes flickered, buzzed, and bathed the room in clinical white light. The kitchen was empty. The stainless steel appliances gleamed. The checkered linoleum floor was bare. Click, 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 click. It hadn't stopped. It hadn't even hesitated when the lights came on. Elias spun around. The sound seemed to be coming from the island counter. He dropped to his knees, checking the cabinets underneath. Nothing but cleaning supplies and a lonely box of trash bags. He stood up, his heart rate beginning to outpace the clicking. He leaned over the sink. Was it the drain? He put his ear near the disposal unit. Silence. Click, 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 click. He jerked his head back. The sound had moved. It was behind him now, back in the hallway. "Is someone there?" Elias called out. His voice cracked, sounding small and pathetic in the empty house. No answer, just the tempo. He grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, a cliché weapon, he knew, but the weight of it felt reassuring. He moved back toward the hallway. The clicking stopped. Elias stood in the archway, the skillet raised, his chest heaving. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. "Okay," he muttered, his brain scrambling for a rationalization. "Okay, termites, big ones, or the house settling." He lowered the pan. He needed his phone. He needed to record this, to play it back in the morning light when the shadows weren't so long, so he could analyze the frequency and prove it was just pipes. He turned back toward his bedroom. As he crossed the threshold of the hallway, the grandfather clock chimed. Bong! Elias jumped, nearly dropping the skillet. He spun around to face the clock. The pendulum was still. The hands were still frozen at 3:17. Bong. The sound was wrong. The grandfather clock had a deep, brassy resonance that vibrated in your chest. The sound was hollow. It sounded like someone mimicking the chime with their voice, amplified through a long plastic tube. A vocal impression of a bell. Bong. "Stop it," Elias said. Click, 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 click. The rapid ticking returned, emanating from the clock itself. Elias approached the machine, anger briefly overriding fear. He reached for the handle of the lower cabinet where the weights hung. He yanked the door open. The chains hung limp. The weights were at the bottom. There was nothing inside the casing but shadows and the smell of cedar. He looked up at the clock face. Behind the glass, the gears were motionless, but the sound was louder now. Click, click, click. It wasn't coming from the mechanism. It was coming from the space behind the clock, the gap between the mahogany backboard and the drywall. Elias gripped the side of the heavy clock. He was a strong man. He could tilt it. He needed to see the mouse, the bug, the loose wire. He needed to see the variable that was ruining his equation. He pulled. The clock groaned, tilting away from the wall. Elias shined the flashlight feature of his phone into the gap. There was nothing there, just smooth cream-colored drywall and a few dust bunnies. He let the clock slam back against the wall. Click, click, click. The sound moved again. It was now in the ceiling, directly above his head. Elias looked up. The attic hatch. It was located in the hallway ceiling just a few feet from the clock. A square of plywood painted white with a small pull string. The clicking was muffled now, creating a scratching vibration against the wood of the hatch. "It's an animal," Elias told himself. "A raccoon got in. It's scratching the wood, and the acoustics are making it sound rhythmic. He shouldn't open it. He knew he shouldn't. But the violation of his sanctuary, the disruption of his order, was an itch he couldn't leave unscratched." He went to the hall closet and retrieved the stepladder. He set it up under the hatch. He climbed until his head was level with the ceiling. The sound was right there, intimate. Click, click, click. He reached up, grabbed the string, and pulled. The hatch slid down with a screech of springs. A puff of insulation dust drifted down, making Elias cough. He pulled the fold downstairs fast, retreating down the ladder as they extended. Darkness yawned above him. He aimed his phone light up the stairs. The beam cut through the swirling dust motes, illuminating pink fiberglass insulation and wooden rafters. "Hello," he called up. The clicking stopped. Elias waited. 10 seconds, 20. He began to climb the attic stairs slowly. His head rose above the floor level of the attic. He swept the light left, then right. It was a cavern of shadows, old boxes from the previous owner, suspicious shapes under tarps, the skeletal framework of the roof. There was nothing moving. Elias exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Just a house," he whispered. "Just an old, settling house." Click. The sound came from right beside his ear. Elias flailed, nearly falling backward down the stairs. He shone the light frantically to his left. Sitting on a truss 3 feet away was a shape. It was pale, roughly the size of a child, but comprised entirely of angles that felt mathematically impossible. It looked like a origami figure folded from wet, raw chicken skin. It had no face, only a smooth, damp surface where features should be. But it had a throat. Elias froze, paralyzed by a primal recognition of predator. The thing's throat convulsed. Click. It wasn't a noise. It was a mimicry. The creature was replicating the sound of the clock's escapement gear. Elias stared in horror. The creature shifted its weight, its limbs unfolding with a sickening, silent grace. It tilted its faceless head. Then its chest expanded, vibrating. Bong! It threw the sound at him, the hollow vocal imitation of the hour strike. Elias scrambled backward, falling down the remaining steps. He hit the hallway floor hard, the wind knocked out of him. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his hip, and slammed the attic stairs upward. They didn't latch completely, hanging slightly open. He ran. He sprinted into the bedroom, grabbed his car keys, and bolted for the front door. He fumbled with the deadbolt, his hands shaking so violently he dropped the keys. Click, click, click. The sound was coming from the air vents now, rapid, approaching. He scooped up the keys, unlocked the door, and burst out into the humid night air. He didn't look back. He dove into his sedan, locked the doors, and reversed out of the driveway, tearing up the lawn. He didn't stop driving until he reached a 24-hour diner 10 miles away, bathed in the safety of neon and grease. It took 2 weeks for Elias to return. He stayed in a motel. He hired a contractor to go in during the day. They checked the attic. They found nothing. No raccoon droppings, no damp insulation, no pale folded things. Elias eventually convinced himself it was a waking nightmare, a psychotic break induced by stress and sleep deprivation. He was an actuary. He dealt in probabilities. The probability of a monster in his attic was 0. The probability of a mental breakdown was statistically significant. He went back on a Saturday afternoon. The house was bright, sunny, and silent. He walked through the rooms. The attic hatch was closed tight. The air smelled of lemon cleaner, courtesy of the cleaning service he'd hired. He stood in the hallway. The grandfather clock was there. It was stopped. The pendulum hung dead center. The hands read 3:17. Elias felt a foolish smile tug at his lips. He opened the glass door and reached inside. He wound the weights. He gave the pendulum a gentle push. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The heavy, metallic, comforting rhythm returned. The heartbeat of the house. Elias sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders. He went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, and ate it while watching the news on his phone. Night fell. He went through his routine: bourbon, teeth, bed. He lay in the dark, listening to the house. The refrigerator hummed, the AC unit kicked on, and from the hallway the steady rhythmic assurance of the clock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Elias drifted toward sleep. Tick, tock, tick, tock. He frowned. He was good with numbers. He was good with patterns. The grandfather clock was an antique. It was imperfect. It lost about 4 seconds a day. Its rhythm was a majestic tick, tock, with exactly 1.05 seconds between the swing. He listened closely. Tick, tock, tick, tock. This rhythm was perfect, atomic clock perfect, exactly 1.00 seconds. Elias opened his eyes. The sound was too clean. There was no subtle scrape of metal on metal, no faint whir of the gears turning. It was just the sound, isolated. He rolled over and looked at the digital alarm clock. 3:17 a.m. The cold wash of dread hit him harder than before. He hadn't wound the clock enough to last 2 weeks. He had restarted it today. But he remembered. He hadn't actually checked if the gears were engaging. He had just pushed the pendulum. He sat up. From the hallway, the sound continued. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Elias got out of bed. He didn't turn on the light. He walked to the doorway. The hallway was dark. He looked toward the end of the hall. The grandfather clock was gone. The space where it had stood was empty. The wallpaper was unblemished, but the sound was still there. It was standing right where the clock used to be. Tick, tock. Elias squinted into the gloom. Something was standing there, tall, thin. It wasn't the clock. The pale, folded thing had unfolded. It stood 7 feet tall, rigid as wood. Its arms were held tight against its sides. Its legs were stiff. It was mimicking the shape of the clock now. Elias couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The thing's head, that smooth, faceless surface, was positioned exactly where the clock face had been. It leaned forward just an inch. Tick. It rocked back. Tock. It was swaying. The entire creature was swaying back and forth, dragging its feet slightly on the floorboards to mimic the sound of the pendulum cutting the air. Tick, tock, Elias backed away, his hand finding the doorknob of his bedroom. The swaying stopped. The creature froze in the center of the hallway. The silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then, from the center of the pale, faceless head, a vertical slit opened. Wet and pink. "Cuckoo," it whispered, and then it began to run.